At the end of my 4 years of VIP flying, I was appointed to be personal staff officer to the Commander-in-Chief of Transport Command. This was a very nice job, but I was away from flying, and suddenly they came up with suggesting my next posting should be as a dreadful proper desk staff job. This was after a year and a half. At that time, I elected to change my role entirely. My Commander-in-Chief said I was mad, that I could go to a very nice job, be promoted to anything after acting squadron leader I was a squadron leader already, to acting wing commander, and he mentioned Abingdon and some new transport aircraft that were coming in, which he'd like me to take over. And so I told him that I'd absolutely had enough of transport flying. I would like to now fulfill my dream when I first flew in the Middle East. Every little strip we landed on, or the bigger strips, the base strips, there was always a Beaufighter, night fighter squadron there, all sleek and black with all the bits of wires sticking out in the front and aerials. And I loved going over and talking to them. So when I said I'd like to go into night fighters, my Commander-in-Chief had a fit. Anyway, we eventually, after appealing to the C&C Fighter Command, who never allowed anyone over the age of 24, 25 to join Fighter Command for the first time, Air Chief Marshal Embry, who was a bit of a Tartar, but a brilliant aviator, well, Embry said no way, and eventually I called his office, and my C&C said, "You're allowed to go and meet the Air Marshal." And I did, and had a long talk with him and told him about my eagerness, and he said, "I'll give you a trial." So I was sent to a conversion course, which they thought I would fail, but I went through that in 3 weeks when it was a 8-week course. The aircraft was a Mosquito trainer, and it was the most wonderful aircraft. You know, it was a dream aircraft. It handled beautifully, it was fast. They were all getting clapped out, the Mosquitoes, from all the war service. But to me, coming in for the first time, it was great. As a result, the C&C Fighter Command had no option but to send me on to the next course, which was the Night Fighter Operational Conversion Unit in Yorkshire at Leeming. And there I flew the Mosquito NF-35s. And that was, again, a bit heavier than the trainer, but it was a lovely aircraft with great acceleration and very, very nice to handle in the dark at night. Perfect platform for night fighting. I fell into the role with absolute ease. I had a wonderful navigator who literally told me exactly what to do all the time, but nevertheless we formed a great team, and I came out as head of the course and also above average. So going to an entirely new role, it obviously fitted me. I was then posted to number 25 Squadron in West Malling and continued to learn to fly the night role, became senior flight commander very quickly, and then we converted onto the Vampire 10. They were lovely, gorgeous little Vampire, 2 seats side by side, and very faster even than the Mosquito, very agile, and we could fly somewhat higher. It was almost a gorgeous toy, and yet it did the job that we were up for quite well. I did something like 2.5 years as senior flight commander, then acting CO of 25 Squadron, and then they asked for volunteers to go and fly in the United States of America. Well, there was a huge rush. We'd all been looking at the wonderful pictures, colored pictures in the magazines and on TV of these American aircraft, silver with lovely colored wingtips and motifs. And I couldn't wish to go there fast enough. And the posting was to Los Angeles, to a lovely, lovely area on the coast. What more could an exchange officer want? So I volunteered, and I was down to a short list of 6, and then I was given the appointment. 2 weeks, 10 days before going, I was taking 3 of my children with me, my wife and 3 children, I was called to the Air Ministry on a Saturday morning and told them, "Awfully sorry, there's a little change here. You're now going to Alaska." And I said, "Well, I can't go there. I've got my family." "Oh, they do have wives and children up there." And so instead of, everybody was disappointed. I wondered what the heck I had volunteered for. So after a long, long journey across the States in DC-4s and DC-6s, we arrived at Seattle and then caught a plane up to Anchorage in Alaska, where we received a very warm welcome indeed. And there I flew as Chief Fighter Training and Chief Operations Training for the 10th Air Division. We had 3 squadrons and a reserve set up there. And so we were flying the F94 Sea, which was a lovely little nippy night fighter, which they thought was wonderful. It was only a night fighter version of the F80 Sea, their first jet, and which was copied almost from all the RAF drawings, its power and everything else, but I don't want to go into that. The fact of the matter is that it was a nice thing to flog around, but not much better, if anything, better than the de Havilland night fighter, the Vampire 10. And then after about 6 months, we were told that we were going to convert onto the F89D, Northrop F89D. And as Chief of Training and Operations of the 3 night fighter squadrons, they asked if I'd like to go down to a huge base near San Francisco, where we converted quickly onto the F89D and then brought 4 of them back. It was a hair-raising journey because the first thing we learned, it wasn't very good at climbing. It took ages to get up to 25,000 feet, and half the fuel seemed to go in the climb. We had some very close misses going up through America, and we got to Seattle and then flew on through Canada, Edmonton, right all the way up to the Yukon and then into Alaska. It was a wonderful journey, except that we were apprehensive about the aircraft. So we thought that maybe it's to do with it being new and all that sort of thing. We got back to Anchorage, handed the aircraft over, and over the next few weeks, the whole complement of 3 squadrons and a bit all converted to the F89D. I wasn't flying every day. I flew with each of the 3 squadrons from time to time. But after a while, I began to realize that the efficiency of the 10th Air Division night fighter world was way, way below anything I understood. There was a casual air, tomorrow is okay, oh, do we have to train and put the lights out to get reality? And I said, well, you either do that or you might as well stay on the ground. There's no point in learning to find an aircraft, then do a dummy attack on it in total darkness. That's the whole point. But they didn't like doing that, and I appealed to them. I tried every method. I even took an aircraft up to photograph them doing this, that, and the other. So I found myself, as the only RAF officer, feeling very, very badly indeed. And yet the entertainment was good. They made a lot of fuss, from the generals right down. And one hated to be controversial or difficult. I mean, most exchange officers had flown in lovely bases in America, and it was more or less a holiday. But for me, it was a very tricky time because the winter only had 2 hours light in the day, and the summer only 2 hours darkness. And trying to get them to do night fighting in the summer nights was hopeless. So I started the systems of putting boards up and all that, but they didn't like using them at all. In the winter, it was hair-raising because as well as being down to minus 40, 45 on the ground, there were lots of problems with ice fog and running out of fuel. This aircraft, nobody in America would admit that this aircraft was anything but a dream, superb aircraft. And yet we had over on the other side of the Little Diomede and Great Diomede Islands in the middle of the Bering Straits, only 350 miles away were these top light bombers and medium-sized Russian bombers. And the thought of these standing there ready to go, and now this clumsy lot, I thought, is painful. And I felt my responsibilities very badly. And so I went to see the general and told him my difficulties. And after a while, the senior RAF man in Washington came up and joined me, and I said, I'm not complaining, I just want you to know that this is not up to RAF standards, nor is it up to what I know to be the minimum night fighting military standard. And the next thing is that the whole thing changed. They were very slow to adapt for reality's sake, and eventually, when I left after 2.25 years, they were beginning to operate at a more serious level. I found this very difficult, really, because our air firing was very poor. I had to get some heavy bombers to tow our targets along, and we had a lot of fun there. Then I took a team of F-89Ds from Alaska down to the United States Air Force international air firing competition in Yuma in Arizona. And I met other RAF exchange officers there, and they confirmed much of my views, but didn't want to make a fuss because it was a pleasant life for them. And I'm not glad to say, but my point was made when we came bottom of all the world in air firing, whether by rocket or by guns. So I went back to Alaska, and we managed to get huge strategic Air Force fly paths from Japan coming straight across Alaska instead of going straight into California. And that was a good measure as to what their ability was. But this aircraft almost ran dry at about 25,000 feet, climbing slowly. They also said it was supersonic, and you had to dive the aircraft to get anywhere near it. And I had some very narrow misses diving the aircraft with some of their top pilots who wouldn't agree that they weren't supersonic. And we had some very near misses. And even after we failed to go through and nearly crashed, they still believed this aircraft was supersonic and was wonderful. Now, you might think I'm very anti-American, but I'm not. I met some wonderful people, and I'd say 10% of their pilots then were as good as anything in the RAF's top 5%. Then about 50 to 55% were very ordinary. As a squadron commander in the RAF in Britain on Night Fighter Squadron, I'd have a big job bringing them up to scratch, even RAF people. And the rest I wouldn't have sweeping the hangar floors. And I told this to an Air Marshal, Assistant Chief of the Air Staff, when I was debriefed in the Air Ministry. And he took great notice of it. And I finished up by just saying to him, I'm very proud to be in the RAF. I'm very proud to be in the night fighter world, because we've got something that they haven't. And I said, I've also learned that all the correspondents, magazines, were all talking. The Americans had this PR work really sewn up. And everything was marvelous in America. But in fact, it wasn't as good as it was said to be. I came home, and I was posted to number 46 Squadron, flying the new Gloucester Javelins, the big triangular-shaped night fighter, which was an absolute dream come true. It was wonderful to handle, it climbed like mad, and it could operate at 45,000 feet, and you didn't feel you were on a coin waiting to stand up and be balanced. It was an incredibly good aircraft, serviced well, and was delightful to fly. I led a formation with 72 aircraft across Farnborough and never had any worries about the maneuverability of the pilots behind to get away if one aircraft had a problem. I only use that as an example, but we could land Javelins on a modest runway because it had superb air brakes, and it had these Maxaret brakes which you just push straight on, and the wheels and the braking took care of itself. In other words, once it started locking up, they let go. And we landed on, 1,500 yards easily at night in terrible conditions. I can't speak highly enough of the Javelin. It was a joy to fly. And to finish my night fighting period in the main on that high level was a very nice way indeed. If I'd gone the other way, I'd have been dissatisfied for the rest of my life. And so I went on to be in charge of night fighting in 11 Group, the fighter part of Fighter Command, and finished up my tour there before eventually, after 2 staff jobs, running a radar station as a rest on the south coast, and then going on to a staff job at Headquarters Technical Training Command. But 2.5 years of doing real staff work and real organisation did teach me an awful lot. And then I was tempted to come out into civilian life at the age of 38. And to this day, I'm not sure if I did the right thing. But I certainly have had a happy time in Civilian Street here in Chobham, in the same house for more or less all these years. And that's the end of my story.